A massive explosion erupts inside the cabin of a commercial jet.
Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!
Terrified passengers fight for their lives.
The chaos ensued when the fire was spreading.
Now the question became, what created this explosion?
We just weren't sure what we were looking at.
Investigators scour the scorched debris for clues.
Let's check the rows near the blast area.
There's a lot of pressure on a post-blast investigator to solve the case quickly.
I found something.
But then they discover something that has no business being anywhere near an aircraft.
We immediately thought it must be a bomb. Hualien Tower, good afternoon. Uni Air 873, visual approach 15 miles out.
Uni Air Flight 873 is nearing Hualien Airport in Taiwan.
Uni Air 873, continue approach, report at 5 miles out.
The Taiwanese crew works for regional airline Uni Air. The first officer is flying under the watchful eye of the more experienced captain. They've been in the air for only 20 minutes. Traveling south, hugging the coastline from Taipei to Hualien.
It was what you'd call a puddle jumper. It was a short flight. You don't expect anything to happen.
Hualien is a popular destination for Taipei residents. On a warm August day, passengers are looking forward to some vacation time. The plane is a twin-engine MD-90, a recent addition to Boeing's fleet.
The MD-90 was fairly new at the time. It was only about 4 years old since its manufacture. And it was generally a very solid aircraft.
Flaps 11. Flaps 11.
The crew prepares to land right on schedule on the small single runway used by both civilian and military flights. But as they close in, the first officer struggles with the landing.
Too high. Too high.
It was a little bit of a bumpy landing. Wasn't anything highly unusual.
You were sinking too fast. I have control.
The captain takes over the controls.
You have control. The pilot in command had over 5,000 hours of flight time. The co-pilot, he was newer of the two, and that's good to put people together with one with a lot of experience and one with a little. It trains people.
The captain engages the thrust reversers and hits the brakes.
Nobody would have felt anything highly unusual during that landing.
The plane touches down with plenty of room on the runway to come to a stop.
You start rolling and it all irons out, so you're on the ground and you start to relax.
But as the plane slows, a fire erupts immediately and spreads quickly. Passengers instantly panic.
Very dangerous situation. There's nowhere for that fire to exasperate itself, and there's oxygen to propagate the fire.
Moments after the fire starts, the power goes out.
Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!
Black smoke spews from the still rolling airplane.
They would have been faced with an urgency to get out of that airplane as quickly as they could.
Panic is as dangerous as the fire. The terrified passengers aren't waiting for the plane to stop. They rush for the exits.
The chaos ensued because the aircraft was still rolling when the fire was spreading. You can't expect any passenger to just sit in a seat and wait for an evacuation.
Seconds after the blast, the plane comes to a complete stop. The captain issues the order.
Evacuate! Evacuate! Evacuate!
Fire is consuming the passenger cabin with terrifying speed.
You have trouble seeing, you have trouble breathing, you have the threat of burn injuries.
Go check on the cabin. Go!
The plane is losing its battle with the fire. Smoke pours out from a huge gash in the fuselage.
我担任中国电视公司在驻花莲的特派员。
I was the correspondent for China Television in Hualien at the time. When I first heard about this accident, my reaction was this could be a very serious one. 1 to 200 passengers' lives could be in danger.
他可能机上100-200人，可能生死未卜。
The 90 passengers and 6 crew members only have seconds to escape.
Fires are dangerous in aircraft because you can't go anywhere. And they erupt surprisingly fast, so you don't have much time to get away from it.
Let's go now. Come on. Let's go now.
The captain is the last crew member to leave the aircraft.
Anybody there? Anybody?
Like some ship captains do, he stayed with his aircraft and made every effort to make sure everybody was off.
When I first arrived at the scene, the fire was so big. Firefighters were trying very hard to put out the fire. I wondered how many people were on the plane, how many casualties.
很多消防人员不断地在灌救，有多少人在飞机上？哦，那有没有人伤亡？
It takes more than an hour to contain the massive fire. By the time it's out, only 59 of the 90 passengers are accounted for. When firefighters finally extinguish the massive inferno, they board the ruined plane looking for the missing passengers.
A lot of people sometimes get knocked over, people step on them. There's all sorts of chaos going on inside that cabin because of the fire. We thought for sure somebody would be stuck in there somehow. The firemen didn't know how many people were still in there.
To everyone's relief, there are no bodies aboard the burned wreckage of Uniair Flight 873. The missing passengers are located. 28 people are hospitalized, many suffering from serious burns. They include a pregnant woman who loses her unborn child. One passenger will later die in hospital. But it could have been much, much worse.
If that aircraft had still been up at cruise altitude, nobody's probably going to survive.
The passenger jet is heavily damaged. It will be up to a small team of investigators to figure out what caused so much destruction and threatened so many lives.
I was in Hong Kong. I got a call, and they said there was a major accident happened in Hualien. I immediately rushed back to Taiwan.
It's the first major investigation for this team. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council, or ASC, is little more than a year old. Dr. Kay Young is the managing director of the Safety Council.
The Aviation Safety Council was formed because Taiwan's safety record was pretty poor.
Investigators review the debris collected from the runway.
Doesn't look like they hit anything. Everything looks like it came from our plane.
What could have caused a relatively new airplane to catch fire on a runway after a safe landing?
We've seen lots of in-flight fires. We've seen crashing into things on landing. I had never seen one where they had some kind of fire erupt after the aircraft got on the ground. Very unusual.
More than 100 MD-90s are in service. Large airlines like Delta use the passenger jets for short to medium-haul flights. If something is wrong with the aircraft, investigators need to know in a hurry.
Questions arise because a perfectly good aircraft getting back on the ground should have taxied up to the gate and offloaded everybody with no problem.
Investigators start questioning witnesses.
Tell me when you first noticed something wrong.
It all happened so fast.
A flight attendant reports that she was just about to make the landing announcement when she heard an explosion.
It was very loud, definitely from inside the plane.
The crew indicating as they still taxi on the runway, they heard a boom.
Investigators discover they're dealing not just with a fire, but also an explosion aboard the plane.
My ears buzzed, and I felt a blast of hot air.
The flight attendant recalls the explosion came from above, near the front left side of the cabin.
Did anything stand out before the blast? Anything out of the ordinary?
Everyone who was in the cabin says much the same thing. There were no warning signs, no unusual smells or sounds until the blast.
Everyone heard a boom. And immediately the smoke started filling up the cabin.
They all confirm an explosion. So what could have caused it?
Right away, you thought must be a bomb.
Because the fire started in an overhead compartment, investigators did not rule out the possibility that explosives were on board.
The pressure to find answers is building. There's speculation that a bomb might be to blame.
The media's attention made the investigation harder. That's always the case.
Police launch a criminal investigation separate from that by Dr. Young's aviation team.
The criminal investigation is looking for who is responsible. The safety investigation is focused on finding out the probable cause and how to try to avoid such similar accident would happen again.
Within 4 days, investigators from the United States National Transportation Safety Board and Federal Aviation Administration arrive to assist in the investigation.
The aircraft
It's a real mess. burned right down to the windows.
The damage is minimal from the main entrance door forward, but the plane has sustained heavy fire damage from aft of the door to the middle of the tail.
There's no damage to the wings or the landing gear.
The worst of it's here.
Explosives expert Ed Cattell is part of the investigation team.
We looked at the area of the major damage where the flap of the aircraft skin had been blown back. It could have been a bombing, and we just weren't sure what we were looking at.
Come on, I have something to show you. Everything we found on the runway is here.
The Taiwanese have started moving debris from the runway into the hangar. Any one of these pieces could be crucial evidence.
There's a lot of pressure on a post-blast investigator to solve the case quickly. There's also a lot of predetermined, I know this was a bomb, it had to be a bomb. What you have to do is you have to dissociate yourself from all of that, and you have to follow the evidence.
That approach soon takes Cattell on a reconnaissance mission inside the burnt-out aircraft. Everything is soaked by the water used to douse the flames, damaged in the evacuation, and buried in dust.
My senses are overwhelmed with the smell of a burned-out fuselage. Burn marks everywhere, there's soot, there's debris.
The scorched wreckage is overwhelming, even to a veteran like Cattell.
I was absolutely shocked by the amount of damage. You're thinking people were injured here, and I have to try to figure out what happened.
Cattell must pinpoint where a bomb could have detonated. To a layman's eye, the debris all looks the same. But Cattell knows exactly what to look for.
Look all the way back to the rear, look forward towards the cockpit, and then stop and focus on, okay, where did this start? Where's the center of all of this? Is you always try to go to the point of detonation.
His trained eye quickly identifies the likely detonation point, the burnt-out hole above row 8 where the overhead bin once was.
When a high explosive goes off, it gives off jets of really, really high temperature hot gases. And they literally will burn through a piece of metal, tiny, tiny little holes that will almost look like the surface of the moon. Finding those pieces is essentially what we would call the silver bullet.
But instead of the telltale holes, he finds the skin ripped open along the rivet lines that join sections of fuselage together.
We had a whole section of fuselage that tore along the rivet lines. The effects were more of a pushing and heaving than a shattering in a really high-pressure, high-explosive event.
If not a bomb, what could have caused an explosion powerful enough to destroy a passenger jet?
We have to try to figure out what caused it.
Okay, let's see if the tape can tell us anything.
Taiwanese and American investigators are struggling to determine what triggered the massive explosion aboard Uni Air Flight 873. Could it have been a bomb in an overhead bin in the passenger cabin? Or something else? They turn to the black boxes for clues.
Quantum Tower, good afternoon.
It's a short flight, just 20 minutes in the air. And as investigators listen, they soon discover it's uneventful.
Flight crew's conversation with the tower, ATC tower, everything was quite normal.
Except for a somewhat bumpy landing.
Too high.
He was sinking too fast. I have control.
After touchdown, the captain engages the thrust reverse.
So far, so good.
You could hear the thrust reversers, you could hear the speed brakes come up, you could hear everything from the cockpit as being normal, but something happened during that landing sequence.
It came right out of the blue.
There was absolutely no hint of trouble before the explosion.
Mayday, mayday, mayday!
We could pretty much rule out the flight crew having anything to do with this. The first they knew something was different was when they heard that sound.
Can we hear that explosion again?
The boom was fairly dull, the time interval, slightly prolonged.
The sound itself could be the biggest clue on the audio tape. It wasn't the very rapid, high-frequency spike of a bomb.
Send it in for analysis, please.
The sound of the explosion on board Flight 873 is compared to sounds of various types of explosions.
So we compare all the acoustic data from the NTSB, from various different sources. We determined it was a gaseous explosion.
It's a new theory that fits with what Ed Cattell saw in the wrecked cabin.
The effects were more of a slower rolling blast or shock wave than the hard-hitting punch of a high explosive. And one thing that came to mind was the possibility of a fuel-air explosion.
Fuel explosions on airplanes are rare but deadly. The worst was in July 1996, when a TWA 747 exploded soon after takeoff from New York. All 230 people on board died, making it one of the deadliest aviation accidents in US history. But the flight data recorder shows no irregularities with the fuel systems on Uniair Flight 873.
Nothing here.
Investigators can't find any other mechanical issues either. The MD-90 is off the hook.
Whatever it was, exploded here.
Investigators now focus on the overhead bin above seat 8B that Ed Cattell pinpointed as the point of detonation. They wonder if someone brought explosive materials on board.
The flight attendant said they noticed nothing unusual going into that bin.
So what happened in this bin during the short 20-minute flight to Hualien? Investigator Tony James decides to examine the burnt-out plane for clues that may have been missed.
Let's check the rows near the blast area first.
The carpet was soppy wet. Everything was just goo. There was shards of metal, plastic everywhere, so you needed to be extremely careful not to get injured. We found backpacks, we found suitcases, we found all kinds of things that were burned, but we didn't know what they meant.
James focuses on the area around the overhead bin at row 8.
We had no idea what we were looking for. As a trained investigator, you do not go in with any kind of preconceived ideas. You just look for anything that's just a little bit different from something else.
On the far side, underneath seat 7C, he spots something unusual.
It looked like a bottle or a jug of some sort. It looked like it had been ripped apart. Not burned, but ripped. It turned out it was the top third of a bottle. The rest of it was gone.
I found something.
It's not the look of the fragment that grabs his attention, but the smell.
You could smell gasoline instantly, not kerosene or the fuel that is used in a jet engine.
It smells like gasoline.
What is this doing on this airplane? Gasoline is prohibited from any kind of airplane that I know of, where it's domestic or foreign. The aviation fuel that runs in the jets versus the gasoline that you would run in your automobile have two totally different smells. I knew that there's something different about this accident.
The bottle fragment was found in row 7, just one row forward of the exploded bin. Could this be the source of the gas explosion? Investigators order up a chemical analysis of the bottle fragment.
I don't understand why there'd be gasoline here, but that's really piqued my interest, that could be the fuel that somehow ignited, causing that explosion to rip open the side of the airplane. I'm really excited that we may be onto something.
The fragment is soon identified as coming from a bottle of a common brand of laundry bleach. But lab results show that it wasn't bleach in the bottle.
No question about it. It's gasoline.
It was indeed gasoline, 92 gasoline, which you can find very commonly from any gas station.
It's a remarkable discovery. An innocent-looking 750-milliliter bottle is now the prime suspect in the accident investigation.
Everybody sort of say, well, bingo, we found the golden nugget.
Investigators believe someone swapped the bleach for gasoline.
Gasoline could have leaked out during the flight.
Maybe.
The team gets their first big break, but it raises new questions. Why would anyone bring gasoline onto an airplane?
The next question was, how is gasoline on board the aircraft?
Could an explosion and fire aboard Uni Air Flight 873 really have been caused by a small bottle of gasoline?
This could take a while.
The discovery of a bottle fragment with traces of gasoline on it has investigators perplexed.
I want to look at the screening tapes from Taipei Airport and see if there's anything unusual, see if we can tell who carried this bottle onto the airplane.
It's a painstaking process, with hours of footage to review.
Nothing yet.
We're looking for things that are beyond the normal. We're looking for suspicious behavior. We're looking for items that are singled out by the screeners. We're looking for something that's not right.
Look at this.
A security guard has pulled over a passenger to inspect his bag. The contents proved to be unusual.
There were 4 items that were cause for concern. There was a bottle of camping fuel. There was another large can of insecticide, which typically has propellants that are explosive.
The inspector confiscates the camping fuel and insecticide.
And then 2 bottles that we can't quite tell what they are.
He deliberates over the other 2 bottles.
The screeners really drilled down on reading the labels of these 2 bottles.
Let's see if we can get any closer.
Could one of these be the offender?
Sure looks like a match.
It turns out the 2 bottles are identical and are the same brand of bleach as the fragment found on the plane.
The guard just put them back.
The security person then looked at the contents and read the contents, did not remove the cap, did not smell it, but gave it back and put it back down.
Investigators now question the security inspector to find out more.
Why'd you let the bleach bottles through? Why didn't you open them to check?
The bottle said bleach. He said it was bleach.
That time, there was a procedure. Now, whenever there is a bottle, the inspector should open the bottle and smell it to make sure it's not a hazardous material.
We're opening the family cabin, needed to clean.
Oh, okay.
He did not actually open the cap and smell it and just let it go.
Can you tell me anything about the passenger carrying the bleach bottles?
Sure, I recognized him right away.
Investigators discover that the man who carried the bottle through security was a Taiwanese celebrity named Cao Shoi.
The suspect was a very famous decathlon champion. Almost everybody knew him.
吴金水他又是花莲人所以其实
Cao Shoi was from Hualien, but was famous for decathlon throughout Taiwan.
他是10大这个运动的一个强人。
Ku won multiple medals for Taiwan at international track meets in the 1980s and 90s. After retiring from sport, he became a school teacher. When Cao Shoi is brought in for questioning, he explains that after passing security, he gave his bag to a relative who carried it on board. He pleads his innocence to the media.
Because my family was on the plane, why would I do such a stupid thing as to put gasoline on board?
People were so surprised to find out that he was a suspect in this case.
That's sort of a complicated issue because, number one, he was a very well-known personnel. And number two, it immediately became a criminal investigation.
It's the job of the police to investigate whether Ku has criminal responsibility. Meanwhile, investigators have to determine if these two gasoline-filled bottles were the cause of the explosion.
We did not look into the motive of the suspect. What we did care is how to improve safety. So our focus is what happened, how did it happen?
2 bottles of gasoline end up in an overhead bin. But what caused them to explode?
The team has made significant progress, but identifying 2 small bottles of gasoline is a long way from explaining an explosion. Gasoline in liquid form does not burn, but gas vapor leaking from the bottles could produce highly explosive fumes. Investigators have a key question to answer.
Now that we've established that we had gasoline in an overhead bin, I've got to find the ignition source. So where could that spark have possibly come from?
To understand how 2 small bottles of gasoline could destroy a commercial jet, kill 1 passenger, and injure dozens more, investigators need to determine how the gasoline ignited.
Here we were with a compartment that we knew had 2 bleach bottles that had gasoline in them. We're pretty certain fumes leaked out of them, and you get to a point when that becomes very flammable, and it doesn't take much to set that off.
Investigators get to work looking for whatever might have ignited the leaking gasoline. They focus on the wire bundles that run close to the damaged bin.
An exposed wire near the bin could have caused a spark.
We start with every possible items that are around there, and one of them happens to be the overhead wiring, which runs the PA system, runs the lights, and it could generate some kind of a spark if the insulation was gone off the wire.
Sure, but none come close to the bin's interior.
After thorough investigation, we found nothing that concluded that this is what happened. Nothing had exposed wires. The insulation was all intact.
Even if a wire was faulty, it wouldn't have contacted the fuel.
Okay, then what about the emergency oxygen generators?
An oxygen generator, which provides a passenger with oxygen in an emergency, is another possible culprit. They've been collected from the wreckage site.
We need to check these retaining pins.
If the cabin depressurizes, the mask drops down and you pull on it to release oxygen. The action of pulling the mask releases a retaining pin in the generator. That causes chemicals to react with each other and produce oxygen. These generators have been implicated in a previous plane crash. In 1996, A ValueJet flight crashed into the Florida Everglades, killing all 110 people on board. A fire in the DC-9's cargo area was linked to improper storage of oxygen generators. The ensuing investigation showed the units were highly flammable under certain conditions.
They were stored in a box, and they were not properly secured with a pin, and it generated the heat and created a major explosion.
A missing pin on one of the Uni-Air generators may have led to the explosion.
When you pull the pin to use them, they generate a tremendous amount of heat. So this is one of the areas we wanted to check.
All the pins are intact.
But investigators find that none of the generators have been activated. It's another dead end. As Ed Cattell considers what else could have caused the spark on board the flight, lab technicians go through the exhaustive process of identifying all the debris from the aircraft and runway. They make a curious discovery.
It was a motorcycle battery. And that motorcycle battery was also actually something should not be on the aircraft.
This burnt, beaten-up 12-volt battery takes the investigation down an entirely new path.
This motorcycle battery was found a couple of rows away from the bottle, and the top of the battery has been damaged. And it's exposing the poles, the positive and the negative terminals. They're open and the area around them is damaged. So all of a sudden we have another possible ignition source.
The poles have wire fragments attached to them, but not the kind used to hook the battery up to a motorcycle.
That's another question. What was this battery used for? If it had wires attached to it, it probably wasn't being used on a motorcycle. Maybe it was being used to power a light or an inverter or something. But this is highly unusual.
If the live wires were jostled during flight, the two ends could make contact, causing a spark. A hard landing could have disturbed the battery enough to cross the wires.
You are sinking too fast. I have control.
The bumpy landing seemed innocent enough at the time, but it might have set the whole accident scenario in motion.
Two 750 milliliter bottles of gasoline and a 12-volt motorcycle battery in an overhead bin is just a recipe for disaster.
Scientists at Taiwan's Chung-Shan Institute test whether a 12-volt battery with loose wires was the ignition source of the explosion on board Uni-Air Flight 873. They test one identical to the one found in the plane's debris.
The Taiwanese forensic experts were able to create the spark with the same type of battery.
Looks like it was the battery.
Investigators finally believe they have all the pieces of the puzzle. Vapor from the leaking bottles of gasoline and a battery that provides the spark.
The gasoline may have leaked, created a vapor inside of that overhead bin, and as the aircraft came to a sudden stop, then the battery slid and created an arc. It would have created the explosion to blow the door off of the overhead bin.
Now the final step is to prove it.
We did quite a few simulations to prove that such scenario could happen.
They place a leaky bottle of gasoline inside a similarly sized bin and then use a 12-volt battery to create a spark.
The lid blows right out and there's a flash fire.
It's the final piece of evidence investigators need to wrap up the case.
I would do it.
At the conclusion of this test series, the Taiwanese investigators were able to prove that that battery and a gasoline-air mixture could cause an explosion.
It was the perfect storm of unlikely events. Leaking gas filled the bin with fumes. The plane hit the ground hard, which normally wouldn't be a problem.
They put on the brakes, they put on the reversers, and everything goes flying forward in the overhead bin. Then about halfway down the runway, they let off of the reverse thrusters and the brakes, and everything goes sliding back. Somewhere in that sequence, the battery short-circuited, caused a spark, which caused the explosion. Just a tragic collection of missteps leading to this disaster.
After a long, difficult investigation, Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council releases its accident investigation report. The probable cause, a short in a battery that ignites gasoline vapor and creates an explosion. Some nagging questions remain. Why would anyone bring a banned substance onto an airplane? No clear answer was ever found.
Although we had completed all our investigation and we had all our notes compiled, there was this criminal investigation that went on for a lot longer after we had left the site in Taiwan.
Ku Chin-shoi's court case dragged on for years. After 6 separate trials, he was ultimately found not guilty. The court didn't think there was strong enough evidence to justify a criminal conviction.
We can only conclude that there was a possibility such event could happen. No one can know exactly what happened.
The aviation report calls for an overhaul of the system that screens for hazardous materials in Taiwan. Training for security personnel was improved in the hopes of preventing another disaster.
So the lessons learned are to really inspect the contents of bags and make sure that they don't cause a tragic accident. I'm willing to bet that nobody in screening in Taiwan ever misses another motorcycle battery